A waitress says to the mafia boss, "Hi, sir, my mother has a tattoo just like yours." What happened? The smell of burnt coffee and old grease was the scent of Lena Marlowe's life. At 23, she measured her days in aching feet and the number of double shifts she could pull at the 24-hour diner on the south side of Chicago. The vinyl booths were cracked. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a sound like a dying insect, and the clientele ranged from graveyard shift truckers to the kind of lost souls who had nowhere else to be at 3 in the morning. Lena moved between the tables with an economy of motion, her cheap apron heavy with loose change and order pads. She was quick, quiet, and tried to remain invisible. Invisibility was survival. Every dollar she earned, every $10 tip she smoothed into her pocket, was a desperate calculation against the mountain of debt that threatened to crush her. There was the rent, already 2 weeks late, the electric bill stamped with a final notice, and above all, there were the prescription bottles for her mother, Evelyn, sitting empty on the warped kitchen counter back home. Evelyn was the black hole at the center of Lena's universe. A woman trapped in the wreckage of her own mind. Lena's childhood had not been one of bedtime stories, but of Evelyn's fragmented terrors. Her mother spoke in riddles of a past Lena could not comprehend, a language of violence and fear. Evelyn would grip the kitchen walls, knuckles white, whispering about the blood on the walls, her eyes wide with a horror Lena could not see. She warned Lena away from strangers, especially men with dark eyes, calling them the tattooed devils who came in the night. Lena had learned to navigate these episodes, just as she navigated the diner. She would soothe, she would medicate, and she would clean up the broken dishes. She loved her mother with a fierce, weary desperation, but she was drowning in the effort of keeping them both afloat. Tonight, the diner was unusually dead. A lone trucker nursed a black coffee in the corner, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. The rain outside lashed against the windows, turning the Chicago streets into a watercolor blur of neon and shadow. The bell above the door chimed, a harsh, unwelcome sound that cut through the hiss of the rain. Lena did not look up immediately. She was totaling receipts, her head bent over the counter, but the silence that fell was different from the usual late-night quiet. It was not empty. It was heavy, weighted. The trucker in the corner had frozen, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. She looked up. 5 men stood just inside the doorway, shaking the rain from coats that cost more than Lena made in 6 months. They were not diner people. They were sharply dressed, their suits tailored in dark wool, their shoes polished to a mirror shine. They moved with a predatory grace, an absolute confidence that seemed to suck the air from the room. 4 of them fanned out slightly, scanning the empty booths, their faces hard and unreadable. The man in the center was different. He was perhaps in his late 30s, with an angular face, dark hair brushed back from his forehead, and eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the diner's cheap light. He commanded the space without a single word. He was, Lena thought, beautiful in the way a panther was beautiful, all coiled power and lethal intent. He slid into the corner booth, the one with the best view of the entire room and the entrance. His 4 men took the surrounding tables, creating a perimeter. They did not speak. They just watched. Lena picked up her order pad and a carafe of coffee, her heart hammering a slow, painful rhythm against her ribs. She smoothed her apron, took a shallow breath, and walked over. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice impressively steady. The man in the center looked up at her. The intensity of his gaze made her feel skinned, exposed. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She poured the black coffee into a thick white mug. Her hand did not shake. The 4 other men just watched her, their silence a wall. She served the man in the corner last. "Will you be eating, or just the coffee?" He leaned back against the vinyl, studying her. "We'll eat," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Steak, rare, all of us, and eggs." Lena nodded, writing it down. "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, but he spoke again. "And bring me a cigarillo from the counter, the blacks." She retrieved the small pack and a book of matches, placing them on his table. He pushed a $50 bill toward her. "Keep it." "Thank you, sir." She went to put the order in, her back prickling. When she returned with water glasses, the man was leaning forward, the cigarillo unlit between his fingers. He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating the harsh planes of his face and the hand that cupped the flame. Lena froze. On the back of his hand, just below the knuckle of his index finger, was a tattoo. It was faded, the ink blurred by time, but the design was unmistakable. It was a serpent, its body coiled tightly around the hilt of an ornate dagger, the blade pointing toward his wrist. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that mark before, every day, in glimpses, on her mother's shoulder. Evelyn kept it hidden, but Lena had seen it when she helped her mother dress. A strange, dark sigil on her pale skin. The man, Dante Varelli, though Lena did not know his name, watched the flame consume the match. He had felt the shift in the waitress's attention. He looked up at her, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Lena knew she should stay quiet. Her instincts, honed by a life of surviving the unpredictable, screamed at her to walk away, to get the stakes, to take the money and be invisible. This man was danger. The air around him crackled with it, but she was exhausted. It was nearly 4 a.m, and the coincidence was a sharp, sudden shock. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them, spoken in a voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, sir," she said, her gaze fixed on his hand. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The sound that followed was absolute. The sizzle of the grill, the buzz of the lights, the rain on the glass, it all vanished. The 4 men surrounding them went utterly rigid. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face, made a motion as if to stand, but the man in the booth stopped him with a look. Dante Varelli's expression, which had been one of calm, detached curiosity, fractured. It was not a large change, but it was violent, the calm shattered, replaced by a raw, profound shock that tightened his jaw and widened his dark eyes. He stared at her, not as a customer at a Waitress, but as if she had just pulled a pin from a grenade. He slowly lowered his hand to the table. The cigarillo was forgotten. "What did you say?" His voice was no longer gravelly, it was sharp, lethal. Lena swallowed, the blood draining from her face. "I'm sorry. I saw the tattoo. On your hand. My mother, she has the same one, on her shoulder. Your mother." He said it flatly, not as a question, but as an echo. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Is your mother's full name?" "Lena, it's Evelyn. Evelyn Marlowe." "Marlowe," he repeated. He searched her face, his gaze stripping her bare. "What was her name before that? Her maiden name?" "I don't know," Lena whispered. Truthfully, she never talks about it. "How old is she?" She's 47 or 48, I'm not sure." "Where is she from?" he pressed, leaning forward. "This city." "I don't know," Lena said, her voice shaking now. "She never said. We moved around a lot when I was little. Please, I didn't mean to. I should get your food." Dante stared at her for another long, suffocating moment. He seemed to be seeing something else, something far beyond the grimy diner walls. The shock on his face had been replaced by a dark, consuming intensity, an agitation that radiated from him in waves. He stood up abruptly, the booth scraping loudly against the floor. He threw a $100 bill onto the table. "We're leaving," he commanded. His men stood instantly, the scarred one. Marco looked at Dante, then at Lena, his expression confused and wary. "Boss, the food." "Now." Dante Varelli walked out of the diner without looking back, the bell chiming his exit. His 4 men followed, casting dark, suspicious glances at Lena as they passed. Lena sagged against the counter, her legs feeling like water. The trucker in the corner finally let out a breath and threw a $5 bill on his table, leaving his coffee untouched. He wanted no part of whatever that was. Lena's shift ended at 6 a.m. The rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle, and the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the city. She pulled her thin coat tight and began the 8-block walk to her apartment. the encounter replaying in her mind. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was a new, cold dread. She'd done something stupid. She'd been seen. She walked fast, her keys clutched between her fingers. She heard footsteps behind her, echoing her own. She didn't dare look back. She ducked into an alleyway, a shortcut she usually avoided, and pressed herself against the wet brick, holding her breath. A moment later, a man walked past the alley's entrance. It was the scarred one from the diner, Marco. When he wasn't running, he was just walking, his head turning slightly as if looking for a lost dog. He paused, looked down the street, and then continued on, disappearing around the corner. Lena waited a full 5 minutes, her heart pounding against her ribs, before she sprinted the rest of the way home. She fumbled with the locks and shoved her way into the small, stuffy apartment. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed clothes and something bitter, like burnt toast. Mom? The apartment was a wreck. Cushions were torn from the sofa, and a plate was shattered on the kitchen floor. Evelyn was huddled in the corner by the defunct radiator, her knees drawn to her chest, her hands covering her ears. Mom, what happened? Are you okay? Lena rushed to her, checking her for injuries. Evelyn rocked back and forth, her eyes squeezed shut. He's coming, she chanted, her voice raw. He's coming. The betrayal. The betrayal. Who's coming, Mom? You're scaring me. Evelyn's head snapped up. Her eyes, usually fogged with confusion, were sharp with an ancient terror. You said the name, she shrieked, grabbing Lena's arms. Her grip was like iron. You said it. I didn't say anything. Lena cried, trying to pry her mother's fingers loose. I just got home. Liar, I heard it. You brought them here. Evelyn's eyes darted to the window. Cairo's betrayal wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He promised. But the blood on the walls. They'll come for you. Mom, stop it. It was just a bad dream. Varelli, Evelyn screamed the name, a sound of pure agony. He'll send the devils. He'll find you. Just like he found Cairo. He'll finish it. Lena finally wrestled her mother's arms away and backed up, trembling. She had heard the name Cairo before, in whispers and sobs, but never Varelli, and never with this much violence. She spent the next hour calming Evelyn, forcing a sedative into her, and cleaning up the apartment. She chalked it up to the storm, or a change in the air pressure, or one of her mother's cyclical breakdowns. She had to. To think otherwise, to believe the man in the diner and her mother's terror were connected, was a step into an abyss she could not afford to look into. She wrote the name Varelli off as just another piece of her mother's broken vocabulary. She fell into an exhausted, dreamless sleep around 8 in the morning. She woke in the late afternoon to someone pounding on her apartment door. Lena stumbled out of bed, her head thick with sleep. She peered through the peephole. It was not her neighbor. It was not the landlord. It was a man in a suit, different from the ones at the diner. He was older, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had never smiled. She opened the door a crack, leaving the chain on. Can I help you? The man looked at her, then at the cheap door, with mild disdain. Lena Marlowe? Who's asking? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He pushed it through the crack in the door. What's this? An advance, the man said, his voice flat. For your time, mister. Varelli requests a moment of your time. He wishes to speak with you at his private office. Lena looked down at the envelope. It was stuffed with cash. She could see the edges of $100 bills. It was more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. It was rent. It was medicine. It was food. I don't know any Mr. Varelli. You met him last night, the man said. He's waiting. The car is downstairs. Suspicion, cold and sharp, cut through her grogginess. These were the men her mother had warned her about. I'm not interested, she said, trying to push the envelope back out. The man did not take it. Mr. Varelli is not a man who handles rejection well. He has questions about your mother. Miss Marlowe, he feels, given the circumstances, you will want to answer them. The implication hung in the air. He knows where you live. He knows about your mother. Lena looked back at the closed door to Evelyn's bedroom. She looked at the envelope. She was suspicious. She was terrified. But she was, above all, broke. She was trapped. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She pulled the envelope in, shut the door, and slid the chain off. She pulled on her only pair of clean jeans, splashed water on her face, and checked on her mother, who was finally sleeping deeply from the sedative. Lena tucked the money under her own mattress. She grabbed her keys. She had to go. She had to know. The man was waiting by the elevator. He led her down to the street, where a black sedan was parked at the curb, its engine humming silently. It was not a taxi. It was an armored luxury car, the kind presidents used. The man opened the back door for her. Lena hesitated, then slid inside. The interior was silent, encased in dark leather and the smell of money. The door shut behind her with a heavy, final thud, like a vault ceiling. The central locks clicked, loud in the quiet. Lena felt a sudden, sharp spike of panic. She reached for the door handle to her left. Her fingers brushed against smooth, uninterrupted leather. There was no handle. There was no window crank. She looked at the glass partition separating her from the driver and the gray-haired man in the passenger seat. The glass was thick, distorting the view of the street, and it looked like it could stop a bullet. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, stealing Lena Marlowe from the only world she knew. The ride was silent, broken only by the faint, mechanical whisper of the sedan's engine. Lena sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. The city slid by beyond the thick, impenetrable glass, but it looked distant, like a movie projection. Her neighborhood, with its familiar grit and noise, gave way to towering structures of steel and glass, monuments to a kind of wealth she had only ever seen from the ground. The car descended into a private underground garage, stopping before a discreet, unmarked elevator. The gray-haired man got out and opened her door from the outside. She realized with a jolt that there had never been a way for her to escape. They ascended. The elevator was lined in dark, polished wood, and moved with a pressurized silence. It opened directly into an office that seemed to occupy the entire floor. It was not an office. It was a territory. The floor was dark marble, the desk a single, massive slab of mahogany that looked rooted to the foundation of the building. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a staggering, godlike view of Chicago and the lake beyond. The air smelled of old leather, expensive whiskey, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone. Dante Varelli was not behind his desk. He stood by the window, looking down at the city he seemed to own. He wore a simple black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing densely muscled arms and the edge of more faded ink. He turned as she entered, and his dark eyes swept over her, taking in her fear, her defiance, and the cheapness of her jeans. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a leather chair that was easily worth more than her mother's car. Lena remained standing. "I don't know what you want." "You know what I want," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the diner, which was somehow more frightening. "You know because you brought it to me. Tell me about your mother, Lena." "She's sick," Lena said, her voice shaking. She imagines things. She says things that don't make sense. What I said in the diner. It was a mistake. It meant nothing." Dante moved from the window, circling the desk, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet from her. "The things she says, the tattooed devils, the blood on the walls. Tell me exactly what you remember." "They're just nightmares," Lena insisted, backing up a step until her legs hit the chair. "Humor me." He was patient, the way a scientist is patient with an experiment. "Tell me every name she's ever mentioned in these nightmares, every place, every word." Lena's mind raced, pulling fragments from the wreckage of her childhood. "She talks about Cairo," Lena admitted, her voice dropping. "She screams his name sometimes, and last night, after you, after the diner, she mentioned your name, Varelli." Dante's expression remained perfectly neutral, but a muscle in his jaw clenched. "What else?" "Nothing. Just nonsense. She's not well." Did she ever mention a man named Enzo or Antonio? No, I don't know those names. Did she ever speak of Italy? Of Palermo? No. Dante studied her, his gaze so intense she felt like he was reading the blood in her veins. He seemed to be searching for something in her features, the line of her jaw, the color of her eyes. He stepped closer. Lena flinched, her hands coming up slightly. Please, she's just a sick old woman. We don't have any money. Whatever you think this is, we're not part of it. You're already part of it, he said softly. You were part of it before you were born. He held up his right hand, showing her the tattoo of the serpent and the dagger. You think this is just decoration? He reached out and, before she could react, he took her left hand. His grip was not violent, but it was absolute. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a shockingly gentle stroke that sent a jolt of pure, cold terror through her. She tried to pull away, but his fingers tightened just enough. Lena, he said, his voice a low vibration. This mark is not ink. It is a promise. It's a blood oath, sworn by a brotherhood that started 30 years ago. It bound men together, closer than family, until the day they died, and they died hard. His thumb continued its slow, hypnotic path over the back of her hand. Lena was trembling, mesmerized by the conflict, the predatory stillness of his eyes and the warmth of his skin against hers. There were very few men who wore this, he continued, his gaze locked on hers. And the women who wore it were not wives. They were property. They were sworn to the syndicate, bound to the strongest men. Your mother having this. It means she belonged to someone. Someone I knew. He let go of her hand abruptly, and Lena snatched it back, cradling it against her chest as if he had burned her. He turned away. The car will take you home. Do not go to work tonight. Do not leave your apartment. Do not talk to anyone. A man will be outside your building. He's there for your protection. Protection. Lena's voice was high and thin. Protection from what? From the people who will come looking for you now that you have been found. He dismissed her with a nod. The gray-haired man, who had been standing silent by the elevator, opened the door. Lena was bundled back into the silent car, her mind reeling, the feel of Dante's thumb still phantom warm on her skin. She was dropped at her curb. The black sedan drove to the end of the block and parked, its tinted windows staring back at her. The man Dante had promised was already there. Marco, the scarred one from the diner, leaning against the opposite building, watching. Lena ran inside, up the flights of stairs, her panic rising with every step. She shoved her key into the lock, but it wasn't necessary. The door was already open a few inches. The wood of the jamb splintered and broken. Mom? She pushed the door open onto a scene of total violation. Her small apartment had been ransacked. The sofa cushions were slashed, the stuffing pulled out. The mattress in her room was flipped. The kitchen cabinets were open, their contents smashed on the floor. It was not a robbery. Her small television was still there, and the cash she had hidden under her mattress was scattered across the floor. Untouched. This was a search, a professional one. Mom, she screamed, running to the back bedroom. Evelyn was where she had left her, but she was not asleep. She was huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking silently. She was staring at an empty space on her dresser. They took it, Evelyn whispered. Her voice was a dry, dead rasp. They took the box. Lena looked, the small, rose-patterned tin box where Evelyn kept her few surviving treasures, a lock of baby hair, a few brittle, yellowed photographs, and a stack of old letters, was gone. Who? Mom, who did this? The iron gate, Evelyn muttered, her eyes wide and vacant. The gate is open. Cairo couldn't stop them. He couldn't. And they know. They know about her. Know about who? Lena knelt, grabbing her mother's shoulders. Evelyn's head snapped, and she focused on Lena, truly seeing her for the first time. A terrible, lucid clarity cut through the fog. You, she breathed, her fingers digging into Lena's arms. They'll come again for her daughter. The terror that Lena had been holding at bay finally broke. This was real. The man in the office, the tattoo, The ransacked apartment, it was all connected, a conspiracy of violence that had just swallowed her life. She left her mother rocking. She ran from the apartment, past the broken lock, and sprinted down the stairs into the street. Her mind blank, save for one singular, furious thought. She ran straight toward Marco. He straightened up, surprised by her sudden appearance, but she ignored him, her eyes fixed on the black sedan down the street. "Take me back to him," she yelled, pounding on the car's dark window. "Take me back to him now." The window lowered, revealing the gray-haired man. He looked at her torn fingernails, her wild eyes, and nodded once. "Get in." Marco got in the passenger side. The ride back was a blur of adrenaline and streetlights. This time, Lena did not wait to be escorted. The moment the elevator doors opened, she burst into the office. Dante was standing where she had left him, a phone to his ear. He looked up, his expression hardening as he saw her. He spoke into the phone. "I'll call you back." He ended the call, his eyes never leaving Lena. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You sent them! You broke into my home!" Dante did not move. "No, I did not. Liar, no one knew about me until I met you. You sent your devils to my home. They tore it apart. They took her things." Dante's stillness broke. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. He was furious, but not, she realized, at her. "What did they take?" he demanded, his voice a low snarl. "Money? Jewelry? No, they left the money. They took pictures. Old photos of my mother. They took her letters." Dante's face went pale beneath his olive skin. He swore, a single violent word in Italian. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. "It's worse than I thought. It's not my people. Lena, it's his." "His? Whose?" He turned back to her. The cold calculation was gone, replaced by something raw, something that looked almost like regret. He softened, his shoulders slumping slightly. "The tattoo," he said, "belonged to a syndicate. My family, the Varelli family. 30 years ago, there was a war, a coup. My older brother, Cairo, was the heir." Lena stopped breathing. "Cairo?" "Yes," Dante said, watching her. "He was brilliant, he was charming, he was engaged to be married to a woman who wore that same mark. Her name was Evelyn." Lena felt the floor drop out from under her. "No. She was with him the night he died," Dante said, his voice dropping. "He was assassinated, a coup led by our rivals. When the smoke cleared, Cairo was dead and Evelyn, she was gone, vanished. We all assumed she was dead, killed and buried with him." He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face with a new, desperate intensity. "But she wasn't, was she? She ran. She survived, and she had you." I don't know what you're talking about," Lena stammered, but the dates were aligning in her head. A terrible, sickening math. 23 years ago. "Someone from that old war has found out Evelyn is alive," Dante said, his voice flat and hard. "And they've found out about you, Cairo's daughter. You are the last of his bloodline. Lena, you are a threat, and you are a prize." "So what happens now?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a vast, empty cold. "Now," he said, "I protect what is mine." He made a call. Within an hour, Marco and another man, a quiet giant named Petro, were at her apartment, gently but firmly packing Evelyn's remaining belongings and medication. Evelyn herself was docile, sedated by a doctor who had appeared at the apartment as if by magic. Dante did not take them to a bunker. He took them to the sky. The safe house was a penthouse, 2 floors above his own, in the same building. It was a gilded cage of glass, white marble and beige furniture, sterile and empty, but secured by private elevators and doors that could stop armor-piercing rounds. "No one will find you here," Dante said. Standing in the center of the vast living room, Evelyn was put to bed in a room with a view of the stars. Lena stood by the window, looking down at the city lights, feeling more trapped than she ever had in her rundown apartment. "Why?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Why do this? We're nothing to you." Dante came to stand beside her, his reflection dark in the glass. "Cairo was my brother, and he was all I had. His blood is my blood. That makes you..." family. Lena was exhausted, running on adrenaline and terror. She turned to the sterile, unfamiliar kitchen to get a glass of water. Her hands were shaking. As she gripped the glass, it slipped, shattering in the stainless steel sink. "Damn it!" she hissed, a tear of pure frustration sliding down her cheek. She plunged her hand into the sink to retrieve the larger pieces, and her finger slid against a sharp shard. "Ah!" She pulled her hand back, blood welling from a deep, clean cut on her palm. Before she could even react, Dante was there. He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm, and pulled her hand under the running faucet. The cold water stung. "Hold still," he ordered. He turned, retrieved a first aid kit from a cabinet, and pulled her to a bar stool. He sat opposite her, their knees almost touching, and began to clean the wound with an antiseptic wipe. His touch was surprisingly gentle, methodical. He was focused entirely on her hand, his dark brows drawn in concentration. Lena watched him, her breath caught in her throat. He was so close. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something clean and spicy, and the underlying, warm scent of his skin. She flinched, not from the sting, but from the intimacy of the moment. He stopped instantly. His eyes lifted from her hand to her face. He was closer than he had been in his office. His gaze was no longer analytical, no longer furious. It was something else, dark, possessive, and deeply hungry. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. He was still holding her hand. His thumb stroked the side of her wrist. Just below the cut, he looked at her mouth. Lena's heart was hammering. She was terrified of him, but her body was reacting in a way she could not control. She was leaning in, just a fraction. Dante leaned in, too. His eyes were half closed, his lips parted. They were millimeters away from kissing. A phone vibrated on the marble counter, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dante froze. The spell was broken. He let go of her hand as if it were hot, his expression shuddering, becoming cold and distant once more. He stood and answered the phone, turning his back to her. "Yes," he said, his voice all business. Lena wrapped a paper towel around her bleeding hand, her entire body trembling. She backed away silently, slipping down the hall toward her new bedroom. As she passed the study, she heard his voice, low and hard, carrying clearly in the sterile quiet. "I don't care what it costs," Dante was saying to the person on the phone. "2 men on the penthouse door, 2 in the lobby. I want eyes on both of them, 24/7, the mother and the girl. I want to know when they breathe, when they sleep. Nothing happens without my knowing. Understood?" Lena stopped, the blood draining from her face. She looked at the white marble floor, the pristine walls, the view of the city. This was not a safe house. This was not protection. This was a cage, and he was the zookeeper. The past was a gilded cage, and Ciro Varelli had been its beautiful, doomed prince. Evelyn remembered the smell of his cologne, a mix of expensive tobacco and Sicilian lemon, and the way he would laugh. A bright, careless sound that was never heard in his father's presence. He had courted her in secret, bringing her single, perfect roses stolen from his mother's garden. He was the heir, the golden boy, and she was the daughter of a family lieutenant, promised to him to seal a bond. She had loved him. She had loved his gentleness, a startling vulnerability in a world made of concrete and iron. He had the family eyes, but his were warm, where his father's were chips of ice. And he had the tattoo, the serpent and dagger, given to him on his 18th birthday. He had held her hand, tracing the identical mark on her shoulder, a mark of ownership she had been forced to bear. "It doesn't own you, Evie," he had whispered to her, kissing the ink. "I do, and I will protect you." He had failed. The memory that broke through Evelyn's medicated fog was not the romance, but the end of it, a dinner, a celebration of some new truce. She remembered the sound of the gunfire, a sudden deafening pop, pop, pop that shattered the crystal and the laughter. Cairo had thrown her under the table, his body covering hers, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the doorway, at the men stepping through the smoke, his face a mask of shocked betrayal. He promised, Cairo had stammered, Not in anger, but in confusion, as if a law of physics had been broken. He had been unable to stop it. He had died on top of her, the warmth of his blood soaking her dress. She had lain there for an hour, feigning death, until the assassins left. Then she had run. She had run from the blood on the walls, from the tattooed devils who had betrayed their own, and she had run with Cairo's child, a secret legacy, safe in her womb, back in the present, in the sterile silence of the penthouse. Lena felt the echoes of that past terror. Her mother was sedated in the next room, but Lena was wide awake. Dante's words from the night before, his order for total surveillance, played over and over in her mind. I want to know when they breathe. He was treating her like a prisoner, or, she thought with a cold jolt, a possession. She waited. She listened to the movements of the 2 guards stationed in the hallway outside their private elevator. She waited until 4 in the morning, the hour when the city was quietest, the hour when Dante would be deepest in sleep or distracted by his shadowed business. He had a study in the penthouse, a smaller version of his main office, which he used for secure calls. He had been in there last night. Lena slipped from her bed, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The study was dark, the monitors of the security feed casting a faint blue glow. His laptop was on the desk, closed. She opened it. It was locked, a password. She tried Varelli. Access denied. She tried Cairo. Access denied. She tried the date of Cairo's death, a date she had overheard Dante telling Marco. Access denied. Frustrated, she looked around the desk. Tucked beneath a heavy blotter was a small, black notebook. She opened it. It was full of codes, numbers, logistics. And on the last page, a single word, serpente. She typed it in. The laptop unlocked. She felt a thrill of both guilt and power. His files were organized, clinical, ledgers, shipping manifests, personnel. She avoided those. Her eyes scanned the list until she found a folder labeled with a simple, anonymous E. She clicked it. Her breath hitched. The folder was full of surveillance reports. Her name was everywhere. Lena Marlowe, age 23, waitress at Southside Diner. Subject lives with mother, Evelyn Marlowe. No steady romantic partners. Financials, critical. There were photos of her, taken from a distance. Her walking to the diner, her arguing with her landlord, her sleeping on the bus. He had been watching her for months, maybe longer. Then she saw the subfolder. It was labeled Legacy Risk. She opened it. The first file was a digital scan of an old, faded photograph. A young, smiling Evelyn, looking vibrant and alive, stood next to a handsome, laughing man, Cairo. The second file was a grainy scan of a hospital birth record from 23 years ago. Lena Marlowe, mother Evelyn Marlowe, father unknown. The third file was a photo of her, a baby photo, one that had been in her mother's stolen tin box. Lena sank into his leather chair, the cold dread washing over her. He hadn't just found out about her. He hadn't just confirmed it. He had known. He had known. And he had left her to drown in poverty, to struggle with her mother, to fight for every scrap. He had left her in the dark, labeling her a risk. She was still staring at her own infant face when the elevator chimed. She didn't have time to hide. The study door opened, and Dante stood there. He had not been sleeping, and he was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, his eyes weary from a long night. He saw her in his chair. He saw the laptop screen. His weariness vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous stillness. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, but it held the flat, deadly promise of a blade. Lena's fear was consumed by a sudden, white-hot rage. She stood up, her hands flat on his desk. "Legacy risk?" She spat the words at him. "Is that all I am to you? A line in a file? A risk? You shouldn't have seen that." He took a step into the room. "You've been watching me," she accused, her voice rising, cracking. "For how long? You knew. You knew who I was. And you let me. You let me work in that hellhole. You let my mother suffer. You could have helped. You just watched. You don't understand," he said, his jaw tight. It wasn't confirmed. "This," she yelled, pointing at her baby photo. "This isn't confirmed enough? You knew, and you did nothing. Confirmed? Dante's control snapped. He crossed the room and slammed his hand on the desk, making her jump. You want to talk about confirmed? Yes, I suspected. I've had suspicions for a year, since I first heard whispers of a woman who looked like my brother's ghost, but I couldn't move. I couldn't touch you. Why not? Because the moment I acknowledged you, the moment I brought you into my world, you were dead, he roared. The same people who killed Cairo are still out there. They are old. They are patient. They have been waiting for decades for a sign that his bloodline survived. You mentioning that tattoo in the diner? You didn't just introduce yourself to me. You lit a flare. Lena, you announced your existence to everyone. So you lied to me, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving her trembling. You told me you were protecting me, but you were just protecting your secret. It was to protect you, he insisted, his voice dropping, his anger turning into a raw, desperate frustration. He was closer now, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body. Keeping you anonymous, keeping you poor, keeping you away from me. It was the only way to keep you alive. I kept quiet to protect you from my enemies. His explanation hung in the air, plausible and terrible. It changed nothing, and it changed everything. The betrayal was still there, but now it was laced with a twisted, suffocating form of care. I hate you, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. You look at me and you see a legacy, a risk, a thing. No, he said, his voice rough. He reached out, his hand hovering, not quite touching her face. His dark eyes were filled with a stormy, complex emotion she couldn't name. It was more than anger. It was guilt. It was longing. When I look at you, he said, his voice barely audible, I see him. I see the part of my brother I thought was lost forever. And that, somehow, was worse. She was a ghost to him, a reminder. She shoved him. Don't touch me. Don't look at me like that. He grabbed her wrists, stopping her second push. Like what? Like I'm some relic you just dug up. I don't, he said, his voice a growl. He pulled her closer, his grip like steel, the confrontation, the anger, the years of secrets and the shock of discovery, all converged into a single, unbearable point of tension. The air between them was electric, thick with unspoken, dangerous things. Let go of me, Dante. No. His gaze dropped to her mouth, just as it had in the kitchen. This time, there was no phone to save them. The emotional confrontation tipped over the edge. Her anger, her fear, his guilt, his raw possessiveness. It all ignited. He crushed his mouth to hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not tender. It was a collision, a desperate, angry claiming. It was the taste of whiskey, of power, of a frustration so deep it bordered on violence. It was all the words he could not say, all the protection he had failed to give, all the loneliness she had ever felt. Lena's hands, still trapped in his, fisted against his chest. She should fight. She should scream. This was the man who had spied on her, who was holding her captive, who was the brother of the ghost her mother still wept for. But she didn't fight. She kissed him back. She kissed him with all the rage and terror and confusion that was choking her. It was a drowning, and he was the only solid thing in the water. Her knees went weak, and he shifted, one arm wrapping around her waist, hauling her flush against his body. He was hard muscle and surprising warmth. He kicked the study door shut with his foot, the sound echoing in the silent penthouse. He broke the kiss only to press his mouth to the line of her jaw, his breathing ragged. Lena. He muttered her name like a prayer or a curse. You lied to me, she whispered, her hands uncurling, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt. I kept you safe, he countered, his lips finding the sensitive skin beneath her ear. A shiver racked her body. This was madness. He was the devil her mother had warned her about. You're a monster, she breathed. I am, he admitted, his voice rough against her throat. He pulled back, his dark eyes burning into hers. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. But I am the only monster who will keep you alive. He kissed her again, slower this time, but deeper. It was a kiss of ownership, a brand, and as her fear gave way to a confusing, terrifying wave of longing, she let him. She was lost, and for this one, stolen moment, he was the only anchor she had, miles away, in a dimly lit steakhouse. One of Dante's most trusted lieutenants, Rico, slid a phone across a table. Rico was a man who felt he had been passed over, his loyalty unrewarded. The man opposite him, a captain from the rival Serrano family, picked it up. He swiped through the photos of Lena, clear, high resolution. "So," the Serrano captain said, his voice a low drawl. "The old rumors were true. Cairo planted a seed before he died. Dante has her," Rico said, his face impassive. "He's keeping her in his own building, the penthouse, a fortress. No fortress is perfect," the captain mused, a cruel smile touching his lips. "The girl's existence. This changes the balance. She's leverage, and Julian Serrano loves leverage." The first sign came 3 days later. Lena and Dante had settled into a tense, unspoken truce. The passion had cooled, leaving a fragile, awkward silence. He treated her with a new, guarded respect, but the control was ever present. Evelyn, in a rare moment of lucidity, had gotten dressed. She was by the elevator, her hands full with a mismatched pair of shoes. When Lena found her, "Mom, what are you doing?" "Leaving," Evelyn said, her eyes wide and clear. "This place is a tomb. He's keeping us here to die, just like Cairo." "No, Mom, it's safe here." Lena gently took her arm. Evelyn snatched her arm back, her clarity sharpening into a bitter, cold anger. "Safe? You think he is safe?" She pointed a trembling finger in the direction of Dante's study. "You look at him and you see a savior. I look at him and I see his father's son. Dante is not Cairo. Lena, Cairo was warm. Cairo had a heart. Dante is colder. He is iron. He will not protect you. He will use you." A chill ran down Lena's spine. "That's not true." "He will let you burn," Evelyn whispered, "if it keeps his empire warm." Before Lena could argue, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a picture, a photo of her and Dante, standing by the living room window, taken from so far away they were just silhouettes against the glass. It was time-stamped from that morning. Her blood ran cold. She was being watched, even here. The text below it was simple. "Pretty cage." "Does he let you out?" She ran to Dante's study, her hands shaking. She shoved the phone in his face. "What is this?" Dante looked at the photo, and his face became a mask of cold, controlled fury. He didn't speak. He picked up his own phone and made a call. "Find them," he said. "Find the leak, now." The search was brief and brutal. Dante's organization moved with terrifying efficiency. Within 12 hours, Marco was at his door. "It was Rico," Marco said, his voice flat. "He's been talking to the Serranos. He had a burner phone. We found pictures of the girl on it." Dante's eyes closed. The betrayal cut deep. "Where is he?" "The warehouse. He's talking." "Handle it," Dante ordered. "Make it clean. Send a message to Julian Serrano. Anything that belongs to Cairo belongs to me. And I don't share." Marco nodded once and left. Lena, who had overheard, knew she would never see Rico again. The off-screen finality of it made her sick. The Serranos, her mother had called them butchers, and now they knew she was alive. Dante turned to her, his face grim. The brief, fragile tenderness of their encounter was gone, replaced by the cold, hard strategist. "You are not to leave this floor," he commanded. "What? You are not to go to the lobby. You are not to go on the terrace. You will not leave this apartment, ever, without Marco or me. Your mother's doctor will come here. Food will be brought here. Is that understood?" The order, so absolute, so controlling, snapped the last thread of her compliance. She wasn't a legacy. She wasn't family. She was a prisoner. "You can't do that," she said, her voice trembling with a new, cold fury. "I just did," he said, turning back to his computer. "This isn't protection, Dante. This is a cage. My mother was right about you." He looked up at her, his eyes flat and cold. "Your mother is sick. I am realistic. The Serranos will try to take you. They will not succeed. You will stay where I can see you." Lena stared at him. at the absolute, unyielding power. He was not asking. He was telling. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She rebelled emotionally. She built a wall inside herself, brick by imaginary brick, until she was as cold and remote as he was. She gave him a single, empty nod. "Fine," she said. She turned and walked out of his study, a prisoner in a gilded penthouse, watched by her enemies and captive to the one man who claimed to be her savior. The emotional wall Lena had built lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days of pristine, agonizing silence in the penthouse. 4 days of staring at a billion-dollar view of Chicago, feeling as trapped as a bird in a glass box. Dante was a constant, brooding presence. He worked from the study, took his meals with her in silence, and slept in the bedroom across the hall. He was honoring the cold, fragile line she had drawn, but his control was absolute. Marco and Petro, the 2 large, silent men who were her shadows, stood outside the elevator. They brought the food. They retrieved the medical supplies for her mother. Lena was a princess in a tower, and she was suffocating. She needed to breathe air that was not filtered and recycled. She needed to see a face that was not her mother's pained confusion or Dante's masked intensity. She needed Mia. Mia was her last link to the world before the world of shared tips, cheap apartments, and complaining about rude customers. A world that, from the height of this penthouse, seemed impossibly simple and precious. Lena watched the guards. They changed shifts at 8 in the evening, a precise 3-minute handover. And during those 3 minutes, one guard was by the elevator, and the other was logging in at a security panel down the hall. For 30 seconds, the fire stairwell was unobserved. She didn't pack a bag. She just grabbed her keys and the burner phone Dante had given her, a phone that only had his number and Marco's. She slipped her old, cracked smartphone from beneath her mattress. At 7:59, she was by the service door. She heard the chime of the elevator, the murmur of voices. She slipped into the stairwell, her heart hammering. She ran down 30 flights of stairs, her legs burning, and burst out into a service alley. She was out. The air was cold and smelled of diesel fumes and the river. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled. She ran 2 blocks before she hailed a cab, her hands shaking as she typed Mia's number. "Meet me," she whispered into the phone. "The old cafe on Taylor." Mia was waiting, her face a mask of worry. "Lena, my God, where have you been? I thought you were... Everyone said..." "I don't have time," Lena said, sliding into the booth. The cafe was loud, smelling of garlic and old coffee. It felt like home. "You can't tell anyone you saw me. Lena, what is going on? You look terrified." "I am," Lena explained, the words tumbling out in a hushed, frantic whisper. The diner, the tattoo, the man, the penthouse, the Serranos. Mia, whose biggest worry was usually making rent, stared at her, her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. "Lena, this is insane. This is Mafia. You need to go to the police." "You don't get it," Lena said, grabbing her friend's hand. "They are the police, or they own them. I needed to see you. I needed to know the world was still here." "I'm here." Mia squeezed her hand. "But you're not safe. You need to get somewhere. Out of the city." "I can't," Lena whispered, the reality of her mother, of Dante, crashing back in. "I don't think I can ever leave." They talked for another 10 minutes, a desperate, futile attempt to find a solution where none existed. Finally, Lena knew she had pushed her luck. "I have to go back before he finds out." "He'll find out," Mia said, her voice grim. "Men like that, they always find out." They hugged on the sidewalk. Lena turned to walk toward the main road, her head down, pulling up the hood of her thin jacket. It happened fast. A black van, not a sedan, screeched to a halt beside her. The side door slid open. 2 men in dark clothes and ski masks jumped out. Mia screamed. Lena didn't even have time to run. One man grabbed her by the waist. The other clapped a hand over her mouth, a chemical-soaked rag pressed against her face. She fought, kicking, biting at his glove, the acrid smell burning her nose. She was being dragged, lifted off her feet, pulled toward the dark interior of the van. A car horn blared, deafening. Tires screamed. Dante's armored black sedan, the one that had been parked across the street, unseen, roared to life. It slammed into the side of the van, a sickening crunch of metal on metal. The impact threw the men holding Lena off balance. The sedan's doors opened. Marco and Petro emerged, not as guards, but as soldiers. The scene devolved into a chaotic, brutal flurry of motion. Lena, half-drugged, fell to the pavement, scraping her hands. She heard shouts, the sickening sound of heavy, rhythmic impacts, and then a grunt. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The abduction was a failure. The ambush was broken. Marco yanked Lena to her feet, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't say a word. He bundled her into the back of the sedan, slammed the door, and got in the passenger seat. Petro was already behind the wheel. They peeled away from the curb, leaving the disabled van and the unmoving bodies of the attackers in the alley. Mia was a ghost, pale and screaming on the corner, already fading into the past. The ride back to the penthouse was a suffocating, ringing silence. Lena was trembling, the adrenaline warring with the failed anesthetic. She had been followed. Dante had never trusted her. He had let her walk into a trap. The elevator doors opened into the penthouse. Dante was standing in the middle of the living room, silhouetted against the wall of windows. He was not wearing a jacket. His white shirt was pristine, his posture rigid. He was vibrating with a tension that made the air in the room feel thin. Marco gave him a single nod. Serranos. We handled it. Dante's eyes were locked on Lena. They were black, bottomless, and filled with a rage so pure it was terrifying. Get out, he said to Marco, his voice lethally soft. Marco and Petro vanished, the elevator doors sliding shut, leaving Lena alone with him. She braced herself for the yelling, for the accusations of disobedience. It didn't come. He just stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, strangled roar. Do you have any idea what you just did? Lena started, her voice shaking. I just needed air. Air? He exploded, crossing the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her arms, and shook her. Once, hard. They almost took you. From the sidewalk. In 10 seconds. You would have been gone. Do you understand that? You let them. You were watching, she cried, pushing against his chest. Yes, I was watching. I am always watching, he yelled, his face inches from hers. Did you think I was stupid? Did you think I would just let you walk out of here? I let you have your leash, to see where you would go, to see who would follow. You used me as bait. I protected you, he roared, shaking her again. If my men hadn't been there... Lena. His anger suddenly fractured. The rage cracked, and what was underneath was not coldness, not authority. It was a raw, primal terror. His grip on her arms loosened, his hands sliding up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't known she was crying. Do you know what they would have done to you? He whispered, his voice breaking. The Serranos. They wouldn't have just killed you. They would have taken you apart, piece by piece, and sent you back to me. Just to prove they could, just to hurt me. He pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. He was trembling. The all-powerful Dante Varelli was trembling with fear. She stammered, her hands flat on his chest. I'm sorry, I couldn't breathe in here. Don't, he said, his voice a ragged plea. Don't ever do that again. You are the only thing. The only thing. I cannot lose. I just found you. The confession hung in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. This was not about his empire. This was not about Cairo's legacy. This was about her. It was an obsession, mutual and terrifying. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice small. I'm scared all the time, Dante. I hate this. I hate being locked in here. I hate being scared. I hate what I'm becoming. He pulled back, his dark eyes searching hers. The fight was over, the anger spent, leaving only a vast, aching vulnerability in its wake. The wall inside Lena, the one she had so carefully constructed, crumbled. She wasn't a prisoner rebelling. She was a terrified woman who had almost been stolen, and the only thing that had saved her was the man who was her jailer. She lifted a trembling hand, her scraped palm brushing his jaw. He flinched at the gentle contact, as if it were a blow. He was so unused to comfort. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not like the first time. There was no anger, no collision. This kiss was slow, hesitant. It was a question. It was a plea for comfort. He didn't respond at first, just stood rigid, as if unsure what she wanted. She led, her hands moving from his chest to his shoulders. She was taking control. She was seeking power and safety in the only currency they seemed to share. She deepened the kiss, and he let out a shuddering breath, his hands coming to rest, light and uncertain. On her waist, this was her choice. She broke the kiss and just rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the clean, spicy scent of him. He was solid. He was real. "Stay with me," she whispered, not a command, a request. He didn't speak. He just lifted her, his arms strong and sure, and carried her into his bedroom. It was not a ravaging. It was a careful, deliberate act of placement. He set her down on the dark gray comforter and looked at her, his eyes still full of that raw vulnerability. She tugged at his shirt. He let her. She unbuttoned it, her fingers clumsy, and pushed it off his shoulders. His chest was covered in faded ink and old, silvery scars, a roadmap of the violence that defined him. She traced the long, thin scar over his ribs. He captured her hand, kissing her scraped palm, his lips impossibly gentle. "I would burn the city down before I let them touch you," he murmured against her skin. He let her lead. It was a slow, emotional exploration, a silent acknowledgement that they were both damaged, both trapped. It was not a fire. It was a slow, burning ember, a desperate need to feel safe in a world that was trying to tear them apart. He held her, his touch reverent, and for the first time since she had walked into that diner, Lena let herself believe that she might, for this one night, be safe. The fragile peace of the morning was shattered by Evelyn. She was lucid, clearer than Lena had ever seen her. The failed abduction, the residual fear in the air, had shocked her into a terrible clarity. She found them in the kitchen, drinking coffee in a tense, domestic silence. "He'll kill you both," Evelyn said, her voice a dry rasp. Dante stood. "Evelyn, you're not well. Let's get you back." "I'm perfectly well," she snapped, her eyes so like Lena's, flashing with a cold fire. "I am clearer than I have been in 20 years. I know what you are." She pointed a trembling finger at Dante. "You are his son." "He's dead," Dante said flatly. "My father is dead. He died before Cairo." "That's the lie," Evelyn said, a bitter laugh escaping her. "That's the lie they told you to make you loyal. Your father didn't die. He orchestrated Cairo. My Cairo. He wasn't killed by the Serranos. He was betrayed by his own blood." Dante went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I was pregnant," Evelyn said, the words falling like stones into the silence. "I told Cairo. He was so happy. He was going to leave. He was going to take me and the baby and leave this sewer. Your father found out." "My father," Dante repeated, his voice dangerously low, "was dead." "He was in hiding," Evelyn shrieked. "He had faked his death to consolidate power. Cairo was too soft, too American. Your father couldn't have an heir who would walk away for a woman. So he made a deal. He had his own son assassinated at that dinner. He marked me for death to cleanse the bloodline. I ran, and I never stopped running." Dante sank into a chair, the blood draining from his face. The entire foundation of his life, his loyalty, his revenge, his honor was built on a lie. His brother hadn't been murdered by rivals. He had been executed by their father. While Dante processed this world-ending betrayal, Lena's eyes were on her mother. Evelyn was clutching the simple, tarnished locket she always wore, the one thing she had managed to save from the apartment raid. "Mom," Lena said softly, touching her mother's hand. "What? What did Cairo give you?" Evelyn looked at the locket, her lucidity beginning to fog. "Insurance," she whispered. "He said, if anything happens, Evie, this is our insurance. It's his secrets, all of them. Lena gently unclasped the chain. She fumbled with the clasp of the locket. It opened. Inside, behind the faded, tiny photo of Cairo, was not another photo. It was a micro flash drive, no bigger than her pinky nail. She looked at Dante. He was staring at the drive as if it were a bomb. He took it from her, his hand shaking. He plugged it into his laptop in the study. It was encrypted. He made one call. "Get here, now." His family lawyer, an old, stooped man named Bianchi, arrived in 20 minutes. He looked at the drive, typed in a series of codes, and the files opened. Bianchi's face went ashen. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God." "What is it?" Dante demanded. It's the archives," Bianchi whispered, scrolling. "The real ones, your father's private ledgers, offshore accounts, payments to judges, payments to Serrano captains. It's 30 years of everything. Dante, this doesn't just expose your father's coup. It implicates everyone. The Varelli and the Serrano families. This drive. It could burn the whole city to the ground." The weight of the revelation. The return of the past, the confession of her pregnancy. It was too much. The fragile lucidity that had held Evelyn together shattered. Lena found her an hour later. She'd been too quiet. Lena pushed open the door to her mother's bathroom. Evelyn was on the floor, the pale tile stained with a shocking bright red. A broken water glass was in her hand, the shards embedded in her wrist. Her eyes were closed. Lena's scream was a sound with no words. It was pure, primal agony. Dante, Marco, and Petro were there in an instant. Dante saw the scene, ripped off his own belt and knelt, creating a tourniquet, yelling orders. They didn't go to a hospital. They went to a private, secure clinic in the basement of a building Dante owned. Evelyn was rushed into an operating room. Lena was left in a sterile white hallway, her mother's blood drying on her hands. She sank to the floor, her body folding in on itself. This was her fault. She had opened the door. She had brought the tattooed devils back. She had asked the questions. She had pushed her mother to this. She was sobbing. A raw, gasping sound. When she felt a presence, Dante was standing over her. He had cleaned the blood off his hands, but his shirt was still stained. He didn't speak. He just knelt in front of her, in the sterile hallway, and put his hand on her shoulder. "She will live," he said. It wasn't a hope. It was a command. "This is my fault," Lena choked out, the guilt clawing at her throat. "I did this. I should have left it alone. I killed her." "No," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, but with an edge of steel. "This is not your fault. This is my family's. This is my fault. This is the blood I inherited." He reached out and took her hand, the one that was not covered in blood, the one he had bandaged in the penthouse. He held it tightly. "You will not go through this alone," he said. He looked her in the eyes, his gaze absolute, a vow forged in blood and guilt. "I will not let you. You'll never be alone again." The clinic waiting room was as white and sterile as a bone. Lena sat on a vinyl chair, her mother's blood still a dark stain under her fingernails. She felt hollow, scooped out. Evelyn was stable. The doctor had said. The words meant nothing. Dante stood by the window, his back to her. He had been silent for an hour, a coiled spring of dark energy. The revelation of his father's betrayal had shattered his past. Evelyn's suicide attempt had shattered their present. He was a man with no foundation left, and it made him infinitely more dangerous. Marco and Petro entered, their faces grim. They were joined by two other men, a lean, watchful man named Gino and a heavy-set bull of a man named Sal. These were his 4 pillars. He took the bait, Marco said, his voice low. "Julian Serrano. He's intrigued. He wants a meet. He wants proof." Lena watched Dante's reflection in the dark glass. He turned, his face a mask of cold, hard calculation. The grief was gone, replaced by the strategist. "He'll get his proof," Dante said. "We offer him the drive, all of it, the ledgers, the payments, my father's entire history of betrayal. We offer it in exchange for a full, permanent ceasefire. He guarantees your safety." He nodded toward Lena. "And your mother's." He signs over his roots in the South, and he walks away. You trust him to do that? Petro asked, his arms crossed. Of course not, Dante said, a cruel, thin smile touching his lips. He won't be able to resist. He'll see the files. He'll see a way to cripple my organization. And he'll try to take the drive, and Lena, it's the only move he has. When he makes it, we eliminate him. We cut the head off the Serrano family, and we end this war tonight. It was a double cross. A clean, brutal solution. The meet is at midnight, Dante continued. The old Calumet train yard. Gino, Sal, you're on Overwatch. Marco, Petro, you're with me. He looked at Lena, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. You will stay here. I'm doubling the guard on this floor. You and your mother will be... No. The word was quiet, but it cut through the room, stopping all conversation. The four men looked at her. Dante turned his head slowly. What did you say? I said no. Lena stood up, her legs shaking, but her voice was a rod of iron. You are not locking me in a room while you trade my life. This isn't just your war. Dante, that is my mother in that bed. Those men came for me. I am not a piece of property. I am not Cairo's legacy to be protected or traded. I am in this. You are a civilian, Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You will stay where it is safe. Safe. She let out a harsh, broken laugh. I was safe in my apartment, and it was ransacked. I was safe in your penthouse, and they sent me photos. I was safe on the street, and they almost took me. There is no safe. She walked right up to him, close enough to see the exhaustion and fury warring in his dark eyes. This ends tonight. You said, fine. Then it ends with me present. I am not going to sit here and wait to find out if I've been sold, saved, or widowed before I was ever a wife. I am going. I am a witness. His men looked uncomfortable, watching this unprecedented defiance. Dante stared at her, his jaw so tight it looked like it might crack. He saw the terror in her eyes, but underneath it, he saw a resolve that matched his own. She was not the scared waitress from the diner. She was the woman who had survived, the woman who had kissed him, the woman who had just watched her mother bleed out on a tile floor. She was unbreakable. He was furious. He was terrified. And he had never been more in awe of her. Fine, he snarled. Fine. You want to see the war? You'll see it, but you will wear this. You will not speak. You will not move. You will stand exactly where I tell you to stand, or I will have Petro carry you out myself. Understood? Understood, she replied, not flinching. It was almost midnight. The air in the armored sedan was thick and cold. Lena sat beside Dante, her body rigid inside the light, tight-fitting body armor he had forced her to wear under her jacket. It felt like a costume for a play she had never rehearsed. Marco was in the passenger seat, Petro at the wheel. They drove in silence, leaving the city lights behind, plunging into the industrial wasteland that bordered the rail yards. The car stopped. We walk from here, Dante ordered. The train yard was a graveyard of steel. Rusting boxcars, skeletons of old engines, lay silent under a single, sickly yellow floodlight that illuminated a small clearing. The air smelled of rust, creosote, and damp earth. Gino and Sal were already ghosts, hidden somewhere in the metal skeletons above them. Dante, Lena, Marco, and Petro walked into the light. A moment later, they heard the rumble of engines. 2 heavy black SUVs pulled into the opposite side of the clearing. Doors opened, a dozen men fanned out, their weapons visible. And in the middle, a man in an immaculate, expensive overcoat stepped out. He was older, in his 60s, with slicked back silver hair and a pleasant grandfatherly smile that didn't touch his cold, dead eyes. This was Julian Serrano. Dante, Julian called, his voice smooth and amplified in the quiet yard. A pleasure. You've brought a guest. His eyes slid to Lena, his gaze lingering, oily and assessing. So, this is the girl. This is Cairo's ghost. The drive. Julian, Dante said, his voice flat. He held up a small, silver flash drive. Your family's files, all of them. Your father's, yours, in exchange for the truce. The truce. Julian smiled, stepping forward. A tempting offer, but you see, I've always been one for a fuller acquisition. I think I'll take the drive and the girl, and I'll leave you here with your history." "That's not the deal," Dante said, his hand moving slightly inside his coat. "The deal," Julian said, "has changed. You see, I brought a guest of my own." He snapped his fingers. The side door of one of the SUVs slid open. Two of his men stepped out, dragging a figure between them. She was weak, her feet dragging, a gag wrapped around her mouth. She wore a simple hospital gown. "No," Lena breathed, a sound of pure agony. "It was Evelyn." "How?" Dante whispered, his mask of control shattering. He had left two of his best men at the clinic. "You have a leak, Dante," Julian mocked. "Or you did. It was very expensive, but ultimately not worth the price." He shrugged, as if discussing bad produce. She was surprisingly easy to acquire. Lena tried to surge forward, screaming against the gag that wasn't there. "Mom!" Dante grabbed her arm, his grip a band of steel. "Don't move," he hissed. His mind was racing. His snipers were useless. Evelyn was a human shield. "The drive." "Dante," Julian said, his smile widening. He pulled a pistol from his coat. "Give me the drive, or I'll kill the mother. Then I'll kill the girl, and then I'll kill you. The order doesn't much matter to me." This was the trap, but it was his, not Dante's. Dante had to buy time. He held up the drive. "You kill her. Julian, this drive goes public. I have copies. I'll burn your whole family to the ground, and I'll take mine with me. I'll take everyone down, my father's legacy. Your legacy. All of it. In ashes. Is that what you want?" It was a bluff. The drive in his hand was the only copy. Julian Serrano stared at him. He studied Dante's face, searching for the lie. "You're a Varelli," Julian said, his voice soft. "You're your father's son. You're pragmatic. You won't destroy your own empire for a ghost and a waitress. You're bluffing." He raised his pistol, aiming it not at Evelyn, but at Lena. "Give it to me, or she dies first." He was right, but he had made one mistake. He had given Dante a target. Dante didn't shout a command. He didn't have to. The moment Julian's gun shifted, the silent contract between Dante and his men was broken. "Now," Dante roared. The world exploded in a storm of sound and light. Gino and Sal's rifles cracked from above, not at Julian, but at the men closest to him. Marco and Petro opened fire, their pistols spitting flame. Dante's first move was not to shoot, it was to protect. He grabbed Lena by the waist and threw himself backward, shielding her with his own body, pushing them both behind a massive rusted steel support beam. The air was filled with the deafening whump of gunfire and the ping of bullets sparking off the metal inches from her head. He pushed her down, his body covering hers, and returned fire from around the edge of the beam. He was calm, his shots precise. A bullet, fired wildly from a Serrano man, ricocheted off a nearby boxcar. It struck Dante high on his left arm, tearing through his coat and the flesh beneath. He let out a sharp, pained grunt, a sound she felt more than heard. "Dante!" she screamed, seeing the dark stains spread. "Stay down!" he commanded, his voice a snarl of pain and adrenaline. He kept firing. In the chaos, the two men holding Evelyn were momentarily forgotten. They were trying to find cover, dragging her with them. But Evelyn Marlowe was not the confused, fragile woman from the penthouse. She was the woman who had survived a massacre, the woman who had hidden for 23 years. Her mind was sharp, fueled by a mother's primal terror. She jammed her heel down, hard, onto the instep of the man on her left. He howled and loosened his grip. She didn't hesitate. She lunged for his sidearm, ripping the pistol from his holster. The second man raised his own gun, but she was faster. She fired once. The man holding her arm dropped. She turned and shot the man she had stomped. She was free. At the same moment, another Serrano man, who had flanked them in the chaos, saw his chance. He circled the support beam, his eyes on Dante, who was reloading, his back exposed. The man raised his pistol for a clean execution-style shot. Lena saw him. There was no time to think, no time to scream. A pistol clattered to the ground nearby, dropped from the hand of a man Petro had just shot. Lena scrambled for it. It was heavy. shockingly cold in her trembling hands. She had never held a gun in her life. She didn't aim. She didn't know how. She just stood, pointed the weapon at the man, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was a deafening explosion, the recoil slamming her backward into the steel beam. She opened her eyes, which she had squeezed shut. The man was on the ground, his eyes wide, a dark, spreading stain on his chest. She had just killed a man. Her hands were empty. She had dropped the gun. The shot made Dante spin around. He saw the dead man. He saw Lena, pale as death, shaking, her hands empty. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, were unreadable. Shock, horror, and a terrible, fierce pride. The immediate threat was gone. He turned back. The firefight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Most of Serrano's men were down. Julian Serrano was wounded, clutching his side. His grandfatherly smile gone, replaced by a mask of pained disbelief. He was scrambling, trying to reach his car. Dante stalked out from behind the beam. He walked calmly into the center of the clearing, his own pistol steady, his wounded arm dripping blood onto the gravel. He was the devil Evelyn had always talked about. He was judgment. Julian saw him coming and raised his hands. "Wait, Dante, we can make a deal." Dante didn't speak. He raised his arm and fired once, a single, precise shot that ended the Serrano bloodline. As Julian fell, he stumbled backward, knocking over a large, rusted barrel. It was filled with old oil, or some other industrial fluid. A stray spark from a ricochet landed in the pool, spreading across the ground. A whoosh of flame erupted, a sudden, bright orange fireball that engulfed Serrano's body and the nearby SUV. The laptop case Dante had brought as a prop, containing nothing, was instantly consumed. Dante stood for a moment, watching the fire. He looked down at his right hand. He was still clutching the tiny, silver flash drive, the sum of all their pain. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it into the heart of the inferno. He watched the flames consume it, watched 30 years of betrayal and blood and secrets turn to smoke and ash. "Boss!" Marco yelled. The distant rising wail of police sirens was cutting through the night. "We have to go!" Marco was half carrying Evelyn, who was limping, a bleeding gash on her forehead, but she was alive. She was a warrior. Dante turned and ran to Lena. She was still frozen, staring at the man she had shot. "Lena!" he yelled, grabbing her, pulling her hard. "Look at me! We're leaving! Now!" He half-dragged, half-carried her to their sedan. Petro was already in the driver's seat, the engine roaring. They piled into the back, Dante pulling Lena in after him, Marco shoving Evelyn in beside her. The doors slammed, the car fishtailed on the gravel and shot out of the yard, just as the first blue and red lights flashed at the entrance. Lena was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She just stared at her hands, the hands that had taken a life. Evelyn slumped against her, her breath shallow, reached out a weak, bloodied hand. She didn't touch Lena. She touched Dante's wounded arm. He looked at her, his face grim, his arm held tight against his chest. You came for me," Evelyn whispered, her voice filled with a terrible, dawning wonder. Cairo couldn't, but you did. Thank you." Her eyes rolled back, and she went limp, collapsing into Lena's arms. "Mom!" Lena cried, her paralysis breaking, replaced by a new, sharp terror. "She's alive," Dante said, his voice raw. He pressed a button. "Petro, to the clinic! Now! Now!" Weeks later, the world had settled into a new, strange quiet. The reorganization of the Varelli family was not a war. It was a purge. It was swift, silent, and absolute. Dante, now the undisputed head of the organization, moved with the precision of a surgeon. Anyone whose loyalty had wavered, anyone who had doubted, anyone who had looked at Lena as a liability was simply gone. Ties were cut. Territories were realigned, and the old guard who had served his father's lies were replaced by men who feared and respected their new king. Lena recovered slowly, not in the sterile penthouse, but in Dante's private estate, a sprawling stone fortress hidden in the hills north of the city. The house was surrounded by acres of dense forest, a perimeter of high walls, and a quiet so deep it was almost unnerving. Evelyn was in a private long-term care facility, a beautiful place with gardens and art therapy. She was stabilized. The terror that had haunted her for over 2 decades had finally receded, leaving behind a woman who was tired, but for the first time, at peace. The doctor said she was comfortable, her memories of the past no longer a weapon, but a soft, blurred watercolor. Lena visited her every other day, sitting with her in the sun, holding her hand, 2 survivors finding a new, quiet language. But Lena's own healing was a different matter. Her body had recovered. The scrapes and bruises from the train yard were long faded. The bullet graze on Dante's arm had healed into a tight, silvery scar. But her mind was still trapped in that clearing. She would wake up in the dark, gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was not in Dante's massive, comfortable bed, but on the gravel, the smell of cordite and burning oil in her nose. She would see the man, the one who had been aiming at Dante's back, his eyes wide with shock as her bullet struck him. She would stumble from the bed into the cavernous marble bathroom and scrub her hands, scrubbing until her skin was raw, as if she could wash the memory of the trigger from her fingers. On one of these nights, Dante found her. He'd not been sleeping. He rarely did. He stood in the doorway, a dark, powerful silhouette against the hallway light, watching her. "It won't come off," she whispered, her voice a broken thing. She was trembling, staring at her own hands as if they were alien. The feeling, I killed him. Dante. I took a life. He walked to her, not with pity, but with a fierce, grounding energy. He took her wet hands in his, stopping her frantic motions, and held them tight. "Yes, you did," he said, his voice low and firm. She recoiled, trying to pull away. I'm like you. I'm a monster." "No." He pulled her from the sink, turning her to face him. His grip was insistent, his eyes boring into hers. "Do not ever say that. You are nothing like me. The men I face, the men I've removed. We are in the game. We choose it. That man in the yard, he was there to murder. He was there to execute my brother's daughter. He was there to kill me." He brought her hands to his chest, pressing her palms flat against him. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. "What you did was not murder," he said, his voice a low vibration she felt in her bones. "It was defense. You didn't become one of us, Lena. You survived. There is no sin in survival. You just proved you are stronger than all of them." She looked up at him, her tears staining the front of his shirt. He was not disgusted by her weakness. He was not repulsed by the act. He was giving her absolution, the only kind he knew how to give. She sagged against him, her anger, her guilt, and her terror finally breaking. He held her, his arms a steel cage, but this time, it was a cage that was keeping the world out, not keeping her in. He carried her back to bed, laying her down and covering her. He sat on the edge, a silent guardian in the dark. She reached out, her fingers tracing the new, puckered scar on his arm, the one that lay beside the faded serpent and dagger. "I'm scared," she whispered, "not of the past, but of the present." His body tensed. "You are safe. I will never let anyone—" "No," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not scared of them. Not anymore. I'm scared of this." She touched his hand. "I'm scared of how much I need you, Dante." He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers in the moonlight. "I've been alone my whole life," she continued, the confession pouring out of her. It was hard, and I was poor, but I was mine. I knew how to survive. I knew how to take care of my mother. I knew how to be invisible now. I don't know how to be alone anymore. If you're not in the room, I feel like I can't breathe. If you left—" She didn't need to finish. He saw the new, terrifying vulnerability in her eyes. It was a dependency that mirrored his own obsession. He leaned down, his expression impossibly soft. "Lena," he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. He kissed her, And it was not the angry, possessive kiss of their past. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the penthouse. This was slow and deep and agonizingly tender. It was a kiss that acknowledged her fear and answered it. It was not about ownership. It was a vow. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. His own voice was rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself. "Let me be just as clear," he whispered, his breath warm on her lips. "I am the one who is trapped. From the moment you looked at me in that diner, you were the only thing that was real. If anyone ever tried to take you from me again." He kissed her again, harder this time, a flash of the fire beneath. "I would burn the city for you," he vowed. "I would burn the whole world to the ground and rule over the ashes, just to keep you safe." She believed him, and for the first time, it didn't scare her. She pulled him down, and in the dark, they found a comfort that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with need. A week later, they stood in a private, sun-drenched cemetery. The grass was impossibly green, the stones old and quiet. A large granite mausoleum bore the name Virelli in stark letters, but they were standing in front of a simple, elegant headstone under an oak tree. Xero Virelli, beloved brother. Lena placed a small spray of white lilies at the base. She had dreaded this day, dreaded facing the ghost that had defined her entire life. Dante stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore a dark suit, but he looked less like a Don and more like a man paying his respects. "When you look at me," Lena asked quietly, not looking at him, "who do you see? Is it me? Or am I just his ghost?" Dante was silent for a long time, watching the sunlight play on the carved name. "At first," he admitted, his voice low, "in the diner, when you said your mother's name, all I saw was a past I thought was buried. I saw a legacy, a complication, a danger." He turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Then I saw you fight me, in my own office, demanding the truth. You were terrified, but you stood your ground. I saw you walk out of the penthouse, willing to risk everything just to breathe, and I saw you in the train yard." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "My brother, Cairo was a good man. He was gentle. He was kind, but he wasn't strong. He saw the betrayal coming, and he couldn't stop it. He died because he was soft." His thumb stroked her skin. "When you pulled that trigger, Lena, that wasn't Cairo. When you faced me down, that wasn't Cairo. I don't look at you and see my brother's blood. I look at you and I see his courage, the courage he wished he had. I see the woman who survived him, and who survived me. I see you." He had finally, truly, set her free. They visited Evelyn that afternoon. She was sitting in a sunroom, painting watercolors. When she saw Dante, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "My guardian," she called him. She held Lena's hand, her mind clear, though drifting. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into the drawer of her bedside table. She pulled out a single, worn, yellowed envelope. It was his last letter, Evelyn whispered, pressing it into Lena's hand. "The one he wrote the day before. Before the dinner, I never mailed it. I was supposed to, if I ever got away. I want you to have it. He would have been so proud of you." Lena opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant, looping. It was Cairo's final words to his unborn child. He wrote of his plan to leave, of his fear of his father's coldness. He wrote of his love for Evelyn. And at the end, he had written, "To my child, whoever you are, forgive me for the life I gave you, for the blood that will hunt you. It is a curse. But you are my only blessing. Live the life I couldn't. Be brave. Be free." Lena wept, not for the father she had never known, but for the closure he had just given her. She folded the letter, the last piece of the past, and put it in her pocket. Months passed. The cold grip of winter gave way to a bright, hopeful spring. Lena stood behind a warm, gleaming espresso machine, the smell of dark roast coffee and fresh pastries filling the air. She wore a simple white apron, her hair tied back. She was laughing, a sound that was now easy and frequent. As she handed a cup to a customer, the cafe was small, elegant, with exposed brick walls and pots of bright flowers in the windows. It was hers. She had used the money Dante had insisted was her inheritance, her birthright, to build something new. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer alone. She was working. She was creating. She was living. Dante's protection was still there, but it was no longer a cage. It was Marco, in a sharp suit, sitting at a table on the sidewalk, reading a newspaper and drinking an espresso, an unseen guardian. It was the quiet knowledge that no one in the city would ever dare to threaten the woman who belonged to Dante Varelli. At 6 p.m, Lena locked the front door. Flipping the sign to closed, she tidied the counter, her movements content and practiced. The bell above the door chimed softly. She looked up, a smile already on her face. "I'm closed, sir," she said, her voice teasing. Dante was standing there, watching her. He had shed his suit jacket, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man coming home. He didn't speak. He just walked to his usual booth in the back corner and sat, waiting for her. Lena finished wiping the counter, untied her apron, and walked over to him. She slid into the booth beside him, the vinyl warm. "Long day?" she asked. "They're all long," he said, but his eyes were only on her, full of a quiet, settled peace she had never seen in him before. She took his hand, the right hand, the one with the faded tattoo that had started everything. The new scar from the train yard grazed the head of the serpent, a fresh mark of sacrifice over the old one of blood. Lena lifted his hand, her gaze meeting his, slowly, deliberately. She pressed her lips to the back of his hand, kissing the ink and the scar. He looked at her, his dark eyes questioning. "It's part of me now, too," she whispered. Dante Varelli smiled, tilting her chin up, and kissed her, hard. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey with Lena and Dante. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Remember to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger and passion. And please, share your thoughts in English on what you loved about this story. We cannot wait to read them.